This is CBS 8 News Live at 6.
A makeshift camp in Tijuana that was home to hundreds of migrants has been cleared out. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Carlo Chiquetto.
I'm Marcella Lee. Members of the Mexican Police, National Guard and Army evicted the migrants, most of whom are Central Americans and Mexicans. They had been at the makeshift camp for almost a year.
Advocates and migrants are outraged, saying they did it in the middle of the night to avoid the public eye and media attention. CBS 8's Regina Urita has more on what's happened to the people that were living there.
The Mexican government, in particular the local government, had promised that they were not going to evict or kick out these families from the encampment. And they did so in the worst possible way.
Dulce Garcia from Border Angels is describing the nightmare migrant families lived in the past 24 hours. Before sunrise, over 300 migrant men and women and children were woken up by Mexican military carrying batons and riot shields who forcibly kicked these families out of their makeshift camp.
Perpetuating this xenophobic narrative that they are dangerous.
Migrants of the camp say the military treated them worse than criminals, while others say they were not even given the chance to pick up belongings, leaving behind valuables and perishables.
Children were crying because they were scared. They were traumatized by this eviction. So imagine you're sleeping at 4 in the morning where you've been staying for months.
El Chaparral camp began forming last year after the U.S. began to limit the flow of migrants in compliance with policies that force migrants to wait in Mexico for their immigration court hearing.
Many of these migrants haven't even started an asylum claim yet. They essentially just wanted information about how to do that.
According to Tijuana Mayor Montserrat Caballero, she said it was all about safety and that officers were not armed, except the government forced families out without providing resources. And to make matters even worse, migrants are not safe in a government-provided shelter, meaning they will end up on the streets once again.
Immigration advocates don't just blame the Mexican government, but the U.S. as well, saying President Biden and his administration have contributed to the creation of these camps, as well as restrictive policies like Title 24 and MPP, making it difficult for asylum seekers.
The Biden administration not only has continued to implement Trump's policies, there are two of them in particular, the application of the Title 42 order, which allows Border Patrol agents to expel migrants without due process rights, and then the MPP order, the Remain in Mexico program.
For CBS 8, I'm Regina Urita.
All right, Regina, thanks. A former sheriff's deputy who admitted to shooting and killing an unarmed man who escaped from a patrol car was sentenced to 3 years in state prison today, but there's a chance he won't have to serve any time in state custody.
25-year-old Aaron Russell pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter in the shooting death of 36-year-old Nicholas Bills. It happened in 2020. Bills had been arrested for brandishing a golf club at Park Rangers in Old Town State Park.
CBS 8's Kelly Hessedal has more on what happened in court today.
To put it into perspective, under the plea agreement, the maximum sentence Russell faced was 11 years behind bars. Prosecutors asked for 6 years, but the judge sentenced him to 3 years. However, there was a big catch. Take a listen to what he said.
Mr. Russell, I'm going to sentence you to 3 years into the Department of Corrections. That's the load term of count number 2. However, and it's a big however, I'm going to stay execution of that sentence.
So the judge issued a stay of execution of that sentence, which means this 3-year sentence is just out there basically hanging over Russell's head while he serves 3 years of probation. So as long as he doesn't violate the terms of his probation, he won't actually have to go to state prison. Now, Russell will have to serve a year in custody at the county jail, but he can apply for a work furlough program, which means he goes to work during the day and then spends the night at jail. Now, this was, of course, a big disappointment for Nicholas Bills' family. His cousin called the sentence shameful. His mother gave emotional testimony to the court earlier in the day as she asked that Russell serve real state prison time. She calls the video of her son's death horrifying.
I keep seeing the bullets plunging into the body of my son over and over and over again. And I see my son look back at you, his shooter, and I know he's dying. I want to cry out at the horror of it. I want it to not be so, but it is so. My son Nicky is dead.
And I can only speak from my heart. when I tell you I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm so sorry for the grief and pain that I've caused you.
And so you heard Aaron Russell apologize to Bills' family in that last clip. However, Bills' mother said she just isn't ready to accept his apology yet. Now, the judge cited several factors as to why he gave the sentence or handed down the sentence that he did. He says he took into consideration several things, including Russell's age at the time of the shooting, which was just 23 years old, and the fact that he had no criminal record. That is the very latest from downtown. Kelly Hessedal, CBS 8.
California is ending its indoor mask mandate next week for people who are vaccinated. Masks will also still be required for school kids. Governor Gavin Newsom brought back the indoor mandate in December as Omicron cases jumped. Last month, he extended it through February 15th. State health officials say a requirement that people test negative before visiting hospitals and nursing homes will also be lifted.
Here at CBS 8, we continue to do stories on high SDGE bills. You've shared your frustration as well as questions, and we're dedicated to getting you answers. We're continuing to get complaints from some of you who say your bill has skyrocketed while your usage has not. Coming up tonight in our second half hour, our Shannon Handy will break down an SDGE bill and explain all of the charges line by line and what you're actually paying for.
Some critics say when it comes to those higher electric bills, the customers need to hold the city of San Diego and the mayor accountable.
Here to answer those questions and other questions that you're asking tonight is San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria. Mayor, welcome.
Good evening, Marcella and Carlo.
Let's start with those SDGE bills. You know, we've been reporting the past few weeks that some customers say their bills are double, even triple in some cases what they used to pay. Is there anything your office can do? What can you do to help with this spike?
We're limited in our role. As you may know, the rates are set in an exchange between the California Public Utilities Commission and the utility themselves. What we have tried to do through my administration is actually provide an output for residents to give their feedback on this through a part of our city's energy franchises, giving San Diegans not only an opportunity to hear from the utility what they're planning to do, but the chance to actually testify on that matter, something they could not have done previous to our existing or new franchise agreement, which has no bearing on the rates that people are paying. The other thing that we're doing, Marcella, is actually injecting competition into this space. You may know that later this year, San Diego Community Power, our city's independent community choice aggregator, will soon start supplying San Diegan homes with energy. And that provides important and needed competition in this space. I think that transparency, that opportunity for input, as well as that competition will certainly help. But I know that as cold comfort for San Diegans who are having to pay these bills, including me. I'm a ratepayer and I see the increase in my bill as well. What I would encourage San Diegans to do is to reach out to the California Public Utilities Commission and make their voice heard in future rate hearings.
Mayor Gloria, the franchise agreement is the product of a lot of work to get this new agreement. It's actually a couple of 10-year agreements is one way to look at it. The city can opt out after 10 years. There was opportunities for public input. You guys went through a process, looked at public options even, creating our own energy entity. When we came to that agreement, or the city of San Diego did rather, you said at the time you felt like it was a better deal. Do you feel that way now, seeing what's going on with the rates and the rest of those bills? It's not just rates, it's other fees that are being added to it.
Right. So I want to encourage you to not do what you're doing, which is conflating two issues. The franchise agreement is about the utility's ability to use our rights of way, to put power poles on our sidewalks, to run their lines over our streets. That's what the agreement is. It has nothing to do with the rate setting. Now, in that regard, to the extent that we were able to get greater commitments for repairing our roads after they're dug up for utility undergrounding, that we had better commitments for customer service and other things that we can control through the franchise agreement, it certainly was light years ahead of the deal that was struck back in the 1970s, long before many of the ways that we interact with energy now, solar, wind, and other things were readily available. So it is, of course, a better deal, but that's a separate question from the rates that San Diegans are paying. Again, that's an action between the utility and the state, and that's why the rates that City of San Diego is paying is the same as the rates elsewhere in the SDGE service territory, because it's not just about our franchise agreement, it's about what's happening statewide.
I want to circle back, Mayor, to what you talked about, San Diego Community Power. So SDGE pretty much has a monopoly right now. When we introduce that other competition, will consumers have the choice, or is it going to be neighborhood by neighborhood? How will that work?
Consumers will have choice. They will be automatically enrolled into San Diego Community Power, and they'll have the option to opt out and to return to SDGE. I think that that competition inherently will help to at least allow the utility to consider the fact that ratepayers will have a choice in where to go and maybe rethink whether or not they will choose to pass on those costs to consumers. It's exactly why we put that request for transparency in the franchise agreement. Again, it's separate from the rate setting itself, but it's a very different conversation when you have to come down to San Diego to City Hall and stand there in public and explain yourself. Very different than sort of the quiet hearings that are held in Northern California where average San Diegans can't participate. That's why we fought for that transparency, and I'm glad that's in our franchise agreement.
Mayor Gloria, moving on to another very hot topic. The city, this is a viewer question, the city has been cleaning up homeless encampments and offering help to the people living there. Only a tiny fraction of the homeless are taking the city up on that offer. How frustrating is that for you and for the people who work in this space? And do you feel like you're fighting a losing battle?
No, I don't. And yes, it is frustrating, though, because you see people who are hurting, who are vulnerable, who are sick, and you want them to get help. But I simply see it as a challenge. We have to be persistent and resolved into continuing to go back and offer help until they say yes. And what we know is repeated contact typically will win the trust of the individual, and they will eventually accept services. What you saw last week on Sports Arena Boulevard is not one and done. We will be back there again tomorrow doing that work again, but continuing to do the outreach and continuing to abate the very dangerous conditions that are out there. You know, Carl, I'm talking about hazardous materials, human waste, the kinds of stuff that got people sick in this city in 2017 when 20 homeless people died of hepatitis A. That will not happen on my watch. I will do everything I can to prevent that. But that doesn't mean we throw up our hands when someone and just give up when someone says no. That's a challenge to us to go back and be persistent. I will be persistent in this regard, and I am resolved to doing everything I can to try and address the deplorable conditions that are on the streets.
Mayor, thank you for joining us. For our viewers who may not know, Mayor Todd Gloria joins us on the first Monday of every month, barring a holiday of that like that or some sort. But we appreciate your time, Mayor, in addressing these hot button issues, super important to San Diegans.
I'm always grateful for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.